Some of the best performers I've ever placed were people the boards didn't even want to meet. I've done over 1,200 executive transitions, most of those CEO, and about 350 board searches. I think a few years ago, we entered the fourth chapter, which is the AI era.
Today, we are fortunate enough to have Jason Baumgarten with us, one of the top performers in the executive search space. Jason, thank you for being with us.
It's great to be here, Fahad.
We've known each other for a very long time, and it's been more than 4 years. Very long time. Jason, what I'd love for you to do is walk us through your career, through your trajectory in executive search. Most people enter executive search through various fields, but I feel like you have a very unique experience in that you've experienced it at all levels of your career.
Yeah, it's a bit of an unusual story. I actually went to college wanting to work at McKinsey because I read an article in Business Week about McKinsey, and I went to a fantastic liberal arts college and had a great experience. And then when it came for career time, I realized McKinsey did not recruit there. And there was nothing I could do. There was no way to change their recruiting process. So I ended up meeting an alum who was back on campus talking about careers in business, and he had been at McKinsey. And so I went to talk to him, and we ended up having dinner and got along well. And he said, "Why don't you come work with us for the summer?" I said, "Well, I don't know what you do." And he said, "Well, I work at this firm, Spencer Stuart." And I still had no idea what he did, but I was like, sure. Internships were pretty rare back then.
Right.
And I had done a few others. And so I went to work for Spencer Stuart as really the first intern the firm had ever had. And I got there and sort of everyone was over the age of 50. There was no one my age. And again, this is pre-internet, so there's very little use of computers. But I had a great time. I actually worked on a lot of strategic planning over the summer. And did a strategic plan for launching a tech practice, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
Practices were a new thing in the executive search industry. And then the firm called me back over the winter and said, "We loved what you did. Would you work on a plan for the CEO practice?" So I said, sure. And I got to work with some industry icons that were really, part of the fabric of the executive search industry. So great experience. And I was like, great, but I'll never go back because they don't hire people out of college. And was about to accept another job when the firm called me up and said, "Would you come back?" I said, "Well, sure, but there's this whole thing called an offer letter that you've got to get me because I actually need money and, an apartment." And so they said, "Well, what is it?" I mean, this is really, you can't make this up. They're like, "Well, what do you need in the offer letter?" I'm like, "Well, it's got to have the job, the salary, the start date, the location." I mean, this is really funny. And so the CEO at the time hand wrote an offer letter and faxed it to me. And he said, "All right, can you sign that?" And I was like, sure. And so I came in actually as an associate, which again, now we have an analyst program that for people coming out of college. But back then I was an associate. And then the associate role was great because it was client facing, but I also wanted a little more intellectual stimulation. And so I asked to be the first knowledge manager or one of the first knowledge managers, which was a new field the firm was experimenting with to really try and capture knowledge so that you weren't reinventing the wheel on every search. So I did those two jobs together and did that for a number of years. And then the internet really started to take off. And I was a very early adopter. I'd loved, computers since I was a kid. And I knew it was going to have a huge impact on the industry. And so I wrote a business plan for the firm to enter the sort of online space. And the whole thesis of it was that we should develop a community of executives. And that community, the unique proposition we had was job access and board access. But by doing that, we'd get people to join our community, and we called it the Spencer Stuart Talent Network.
Right.
If this sounds familiar, it did look very similar to LinkedIn. The firm decided in the dot-com bubble to shut it down.
Oh, wow.
And I still remember because I then decided to go off and do tech work. So I went to Stanford for business school, and it was in my first year that the founder of LinkedIn came and talked to us about his new startup, truly a startup, like 10 people. And I ran out of the room to call our general counsel and said, "Please tell me you kept all the patent work and everything else." And he's like, "No, we shut it all down. It was,
Oh, wow.
it was too expensive." So It was a good example of like right time, right place. But that was sort of my first chapter. And then I went off. I spent a summer at Microsoft, and then I went to McKinsey. So I did eventually work at McKinsey, had a fabulous 5 years doing almost nothing to do with recruiting or talent. All I did was, strategy work and service operations. About half my time with tech companies, half my time with non-tech companies.
Right.
And then after about 5 years, I started to feel like, how could I have more impact? I wanted to sort of be more present in the company somehow.
Right.
And out of the blue, the team called and said, we have an idea for you. And I thought Spencer Stuart would have an idea, meaning a job at a company. And they said, would you come open a Seattle office for us and rejoin the firm?
Oh, wow.
And that scratched an entrepreneurial itch to open an office, but it also made me realize leadership and people were the center of success, because I had watched so many teams come and go at McKinsey, so many clients come and go. And the ones that got tons of value out of the work were often just amazing leaders who could not just get a great idea or have an insight, but then propel it into the organization.
Yeah.
So I left the firm. I think I shocked a lot of people I was working with because they were like, what are you doing? But I came back to Spencer Stuart. I opened our Seattle office, which became one of the most fastest growing offices in the firm's history. And, 16 years ago. 16 years ago.
Wow.
So it's been a great journey.
Wow.
And then at Spencer Stuart, I've done every job under the sun. So I've been a partner. I was sat on our board of directors. I worked on our North America leadership team, our global leadership team. I helped us, led our corporate development efforts for a number of years, launched our sustainability program. So got us to net zero because we were becoming more European domiciled. And so it was important from a compliance perspective, but also from a client representation perspective. And then worked on a lot of strategy work. And as you and I have worked together, a lot of tech work with our fabulous CTO, David Baruch. So it's been a fun adventure.
Yeah. Pretty much everything under the sun. It's pretty much, you've run parts of Spencer Stuart like they were your own company.
Yeah.
Is that the Spencer Stuart culture, you think?
The best of the firm is very entrepreneurial. So my most recent role was running the CEO and board practice globally. And, it was really, the idea was to put some things together that hadn't been put together before and see what we could do. And that notion of being entrepreneurial, I was running solutions for a while, which is like new service line creation. And so there's always this spirit of really entrepreneurism and, trying to be responsive to clients.
Yeah.
And then alongside all that, I added up the other day, I've done over 1,200 executive transitions, most of those CEO, and about 350 board searches. So I've been pretty busy.
Everything else you were talking about, those were your side gigs at Spencer.
Your
main gig is like placing CEOs.
Professional services invented the side hustle because you're always double hatting two jobs. And people are always like, oh, are you, do you do the work? I'm like, are you kidding? Like I do the work and then I do some more work and then I do some work on the side. So very hands-on. I mean, we work in small teams. We're very hands-on. I mean, you've seen me do research. I still do de novo research myself.
Okay.
I think it's part of the real art of search is getting your hands dirty and doing the work.
Yeah.
So
I think some of our best ideas came from you using the AI tool that we built and giving us feedback, and everyone on our tech side were like, wow, this guy, is he a researcher or is he a partner? I was like, no, he's kind of a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Well, you lose, I think in professional services, I learned this in McKinsey, like the best partners could still get into the weeds enough. They may not have the latest, they might've forgotten the shortcut in Excel.
Right.
They really understood how the model worked because they were going all the way from the top to the bottom and sort of understanding where to poke at things.
Right.
And I think the best people in this profession, they understand all the components of it.
Right. Touching on that a little bit, really understanding the nuts and bolts. Do you think that that's absolutely necessary in executive search to be a successful consultant?
So it's a really good question. I'll answer it with a little bit of an and/or, which is executive search at the core is still very much a sales profession.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are lots of people who are financially successful recruiters who don't understand the nuts and bolts. But to be successful in terms of the impact you have with clients, I think you do. And so it depends what motivates you and what kind of person you want to be. If you want to be financially successful, you could delegate a lot of that and sort of, live above the surface. If you want to have great impact with clients, which is certainly what motivates me,
Right.
you have to really understand, what does this job mean? What is this company all about? What are the peer groups? What makes this executive tick? How are we going to think about running the process in a way that's distinctive for this client? You have to, it's not that you don't get any help along the way from a fabulous team, but you have to think about all those components like a systems thinker
Right.
to really have the biggest impact.
Right. What's the sales component of it? People think sales means you're selling me stuff. I have a different opinion. We've talked about this, but can you shed your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So in executive search, there's really two components of sales. So the first component is business development for clients. And I always call it trying to convince people you're as good as you are or better than you are, depending on who you are. But the reality is you're really just trying to convince a client you can solve their problem.
Right.
Whether that's succession, search, coaching, top team effectiveness, you're really trying to say, hey, I'm one of the best out there. We can work well together and we can get this solved. And it's very high stress. I mean, if you think about a client, you've hired lots of people, I've hired lots of people. Some of the most stressful moments are deciding to do something about somebody that isn't performing, because then you have to go find somebody better.
Right.
And that's a stressful moment. And so that's one element of the business development or the selling. The other is really, and I really don't like to call this selling so much as in a best world, you're matchmaking, trying to get executives to go down the path of exploration on a role. And what's different about executive search is that in more junior levels of recruiting and careers, people are either looking for work or they're not.
Right.
They tend to go on a job and either they get fired or they quit and then they look for a job.
Right.
As you get up the ladder, what you realize is that jobs become really rare. If I say, well, how many $50 billion market cap CEO opportunities were available in the outside market in consumer services this year? You'd be like, oh, one, right? Or how many $100 billion tech opportunities? And so as you get more senior, whether you're a CFO, a marketing exec, sales exec, CEO, you start to realize that your dream job might only come around once a decade. Well, if it comes around once a decade, you can't be like, oh, I'm not looking right now, call me next year.
Yeah.
Because you'll be retired by the time the next job comes around.
Right.
So I think that what a lot of executives realize is that they have to always be in this sort of in-between state, this liminal state of looking and not looking. They're committed to their job, but they're always testing the market. And the best of them say, listen, if that one isn't the right one, it makes me even more committed to my day job,
Right.
but I'm going to at least do some exploration. The challenge is convincing them that the project you're working on is worth taking a look at, because people have very scarce time. Recruiters always think everyone's thinking about, why didn't they respond to my email? Why didn't they? And I'm like, they've got a day job. They've got a family. They've got commitments. This is like the last thing they want to be distracted by. It's like if you're living in a house and I say, why don't we just go look at that open house down the street? You're like, I don't want to look at the open house.
Right.
But why don't we do a house inspection? Wait, I don't even want to look at the house. You're asking me to do a house inspection? That's kind of the job we're in. We're trying to get you to not only do a quick call with us to learn whether it's interesting, but, commit 10 hours of your day, of your time to do research, to show up, to have a conversation or two, even though we know that that has that may not be the thing, that may not be the job for you from either direction, but we want you to commit that time to explore it, to see. And that's a different kind of, it's really not so much sales as great recruiting, but it is imperative to get people to explore and to open the candidate pool to people who aren't looking.
Yeah, absolutely. On top of that, a lot of senior executives, I feel, especially in the tech world, the ones that I've spoken to, they feel they're kind of trapped in their job. They have the golden handcuffs. They have options that are expiring for the next 4 years and 3 years. And some even have options expiring for 8 or 9 years. And from their point of view, nothing out there can ever match that. How do you still get people to explore?
Part of it is you have to understand who people are. You have to have actual curiosity and empathy for other people. If you don't care about other people, it's a hard job to do because you have to get to know people and understand what are they solving for. If somebody's at a point in their lives where they've got a mortgage, kids in college, and they can take no financial risk, and they've got a huge grant coming up, and really they're at, a very good level for what they are, you honestly might say to them, you know what, stay for 2-3 years and make that money and get a little more comfortable and then look.
Right.
If you talk to somebody and they're miserable in their job,
Right.
they hate going into work, they feel like they're working on unimportant stuff, but they're locked in by money, then you have to say to them, listen, if this was a relationship, if this was any other setting in your life, you would do something about it.
Right.
But there's lots of ways to do something about it. It could be, hey, go talk to your boss and rethink your job, right? Make it your own. Figure out what you can change about your day job to make it exciting and re-energizing again, because you're not doing your employer a service by hating what you do.
Absolutely.
Right. So that could be the advice you give. Or you say, listen, you're assuming nobody will ever buy you out of your options. Why don't you go see? Why don't you go test the market? Or you might realize that somebody's in a false trap where they've made it all about the money, but when you talk to them, they're like, well, actually, if I lost some money in a transition, it wouldn't make a difference to my life, but being happier and more successful in my career would. And the reality is, if you're not really happy in your job, you're probably not going to be as successful.
Right.
And so we've realized that being fulfilled is very important. And there's a lot of studies about what drives happiness. There's a lot of false narratives that money doesn't drive happiness. It actually does have an impact on happiness. But for most people, the number one thing that drives satisfaction is being in a state of flow often enough. And that state of flow comes from being stretched into hard things.
Right.
And I always go back to the Japanese principle of like things I'm good at, things that I enjoy doing, things that the world needs and things that the world will pay for. And in that Venn diagram is what is successful. At the end of the day, that's your hunt as a professional. And if you're missing things that actually are a little bit hard for you, you won't be fulfilled.
Right.
Because you'll be in more of a hedonistic path of just,
being unhappy.
I'm unhappy, but I'm getting paid.
Yeah.
And by the way, some people, that's okay.
Yeah.
There are people for whom contentment is more important than being stretched. And you have to know yourself. I mean, I think one of the hardest things about careers is knowing yourself.
Right.
And knowing what's holding you back and knowing what's going to really matter for you. So if you're one of those people who, if you're successful, it was luck. And if you're unsuccessful, it was you got to shift your mindset before you go off to conquer something.
Right.
If you're one of those people that all successes are you and anything that's bad is bad luck in the environment, you also need to re-examine yourself and readjust your mindset a little bit. So there's a lot of self-learning that makes great executives prosper.
Yeah. I want to know from your point of view, you've seen been in executive search for more than 2 decades now. How's this space changed? It's a really old profession. The Shreks have been around for, in some cases, 60 years or more. How have you, through your career, seen executive search change?
There's a lot of transition in the industry, and some of it's funny things like, we used to courier documents around the country or FedEx documents around the country. If I had a position spec, I would FedEx it on bond paper to your house, right? No email, couldn't email you, didn't have email, print it out, FedEx it to you.
Wow.
So think about that, the dynamics of, you probably had that happen to you once every few years.
Right.
It was special. It's like
Right.
getting a bouquet of flowers,
Right.
not one of 100 emails. So there are little funny things like that. Information asymmetry and discovery was a big deal in the early chapter. So, I've been in this business in and out for 3 decades. So I'll sort of describe a couple of chapters. The first chapter, the big thing that drove the industry was having a network and being able to discover who was in a job, right? There was no LinkedIn, there was no Google, there wasn't even Alta Vista. It was literally, there were some corporate directories that might have an outdated name of a CFO,
right?
Let alone the treasurer or the, head of agency relations or, the junior people in an organization. So the art of getting information and figuring out who was at a company was prized in and of itself. So when I first started in the profession, a lot of time was spent calling a front desk and saying, I'm trying to get in touch with your top, finance executive, and figuring out just who that was, and then figuring out, well, who worked for them and who was in the organization. That was prized because nobody knew, and it took a lot of resources to get it. So that was kind of chapter one, where the discovery of information was really incredibly valued and incredibly hard to do. Lots of other things added value, but that was probably disproportionately valued relative to it is now. I think the second chapter is kind of the post-internet era of search, where increasingly who was in a job was table stakes. Anyone could find that out.
Right.
And then it was really about having asymmetrical relationships or information about that person, about their performance, or having a relationship so that they would trust you to go on that journey I talked about.
Right.
And that was sort of chapter two. I think chapter three that we've been in the last couple of years is really around, I would say, an extension of the profession, where it used to be that you'd do a 3-hour interview with an executive, you'd get to know them, you'd spend a lot of time because you weren't sending bond paper to 400 people,
Right.
right? It was an art of scarcity, and it was an art of getting to know a small number of people well. Now, the business has become more transactional on both sides. Clients are like, I need a CFO. I don't want to spend a lot of time defining it. Just get me a great CFO. I'm picking on CFOs a lot, like without CEOs. Get me a great CEO. I need a great leader. You know what that looks like. Go. And on the flip side, candidates don't necessarily want to spend as much time up front getting to know you. They're not coming into the office for a 4-hour interview for a CEO job. So it's put a lot more of that work into extra services. So firms are doing more work, discovery work up front as extra. Assessments have become an extra, right? Whole industries have been developed. We have a whole team of experts who all they do is executive assessments. Well, we never used to do that, in part because it was part of the process. Now that's something that clients expect to be something that's done at the end by a PhD who's going to do it with the 2 finalists. And so that's changed a little bit the dynamic of, what is the core of what an executive search professional does, at least in a search versus
Right.
what we might do in all these other areas.
Right.
So if that was sort of this last third chapter, I think a few years ago we entered the fourth chapter, which is the AI era. And I think that we'll talk a lot more about this, I know, but I do think this is going to be a profound shift for the industry and really for any white collar work. And so I think that this is going to be the next adventure for the industry to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. You're incredibly successful in this space. You're one of the top performers in the industry, well regarded, well known, 8-figure biller. I know you don't like to talk about that. And there may be like 15 in the executive, maybe 10, 15 people, maybe 20 people max that are billing at your level. Somebody that is entering executive search now and want to get to that level, what would your advice be? Like, from your point of view, what was some of the things that you said, this is what I'm holding myself accountable for, where I'm going to be a top performer, and these are some of the things that I have for myself that I will adhere to as a standard? What was those things be?
So I don't think there's one way to get there. So I think in a lot of professional services, you'll find that top people, the best performing people, whether it's on financial metrics or client service metrics, they have their own pathways. And so, I'll share a few observations of my pathway. The first is my goal was never to be the most commercially successful. My goal was always to do the most impactful work and to do it really well. Now, what's great is that I think clients have recognized that that's valuable, and it's allowed me to do well commercially. But for me, it was always putting the client impact first. I think the second thing is having empathy and care, a standard of care in this profession, I think differentiates you. And, I had this amazing experience in my first chapter at Spencer Stuart through the dot-com bubble. And I had the benefit and and displeasure at times of watching high-flying companies implode and take people's careers with them. And it gave me a real perspective on um, this job does have a lot of influence on people's career. If you talk somebody into something that isn't in their best interest, you really can do them a disservice. Similarly, you can take a client and talk them into a candidate that really isn't a good fit
Right.
and do them a disservice. So I think you have to really hold this profession with care. And to me, that's been really important to me. I think the third thing is you have to have expertise. At least the way I've done it, you have to understand the job. You have to care to be an expert, whether you're doing CMO recruiting, CISO recruiting, CFO recruiting, CEO recruiting, board director recruiting. You can't do it all. I mean, you could do it over time, but you can't do it all at once. You have to be a true expert in the job.
Right.
What does it mean to be a great CFO? What does it mean to be a great CMO? That changes over time, and you have to be an expert in what that means and have a point of view. Um, and then, this probably goes without saying for any profession, but I think people sometimes forget it. You have to work really hard.
Right.
And I'm always amazed, uh, you know, when I meet people who are like, oh, but you've done really well. You must not work. You have to work really hard.
Absolutely.
You have to be responsive, but you also just have to put in the hours because you actually have to do more work.
Right.
It's not, it's not just, I'm going to do 10% of everything. You've got to do 80% of everything. So you've got to do a lot of work. And then we talked earlier about knowing more of how the whole thing works.
Right.
For me, that's been really important because I'm not, it's allowed me to recruit really good people to work with me and at the firm more generally. It's also allowed me to help them grow more quickly
Right.
because I can help them problem solve what's holding them back because I've been there and I know what they're doing. And so that helps me get a higher level of teamwork as well on the team. I mean, professional services always have these weird matrices where you're working with a lot of people who don't like report to you.
Right.
And as you do more and more client work, you need to work with more and more people.
Right.
I think one year I counted up that I'd worked with like 200 people at the firm.
Wow.
Over the course of a year. But everyone I worked with, I tried to really figure out what are they good at and what can I get them to do as part of this project that will lift the project up to be more successful.
Yeah.
So those are a few of the tips I'd give.
Yeah, absolutely. I think on the work hard part also, I think what makes this tougher is that if you're an engineer, your boss will tell you exactly what you need to do and you just do that stuff. But in executive search, if you're a consultant, you don't really know what you need to work hard on, right? It's like you have to create work out of nothing. I think that's what really makes this difficult. I think working hard for a lot of people it's like, okay, tell me what I need to do. I'll work really hard on it. But I think it's the unknown. I think that makes it even harder.
Yeah. And that's even true on the business development side because, people say, oh, you should go sell to company X. I'm like, if company X is performing really well and everybody on the team is performing well and nobody on the team is a retention risk or a retirement risk, they may not really have a need for us. And, I'm a big believer in, trying to be effective and authentic about how I can help a client. And I've often gotten calls where I'm like, hey, I actually don't think you should do a search. I think you should promote this person because you have great potential in your organization and that person is more likely to be a great CXO than if you went out to the outside, and it'll be a great signal to the team. On the flip side, I've interacted with a lot of leaders who view it as a mark of disgrace if they're not promoting from within. I think that's one of the biggest fallacies in leadership.
Right.
If you look at successful CEOs, they actually rotate statistically more members of the team from outside and from skip level than those who are underperformers. So being really careful about getting good performers and not just saying, oh, well, I failed if I haven't promoted someone is actually really important.
Speaking of business development, how do you do business development in executive search? Like for other professional services, hey, it's tax season, probably need tax financial services, or, the firm is 10 years old, you need to do X, Y, and Z. You probably need legal help. If you're a tech company, you need to file patents. How do you do BD for executive search?
Yeah, there's no one size fits all.
Yeah.
right? And unlike a lot of professions, there's no sales team in engineering product team, right?
Right.
This is you're doing it, you're selling it. You know, clients always ask, "Oh, are you really going to be the one that shows up to do the work?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we haven't figured out that model. Like, we haven't. I don't have a back room of people who like do the work. I do the work,
Right.
right? Yes, I have a small team, but like my portion of the project doesn't go away. So you're always doing both sides of it.
Hmm.
The first thing is you have to do good work,
Hmm.
right? If you don't do good work, your reputation in the market suffers. It doesn't mean every project will always be successful.
Right.
Even the very best in the industry will have a few projects out of 100 that don't work out for whatever reason. Could be uncontrollable reasons. It could be the client wants something that really isn't what they should do, and you can't talk them out of it. But the first is you have to do good work.
Right.
The second is you have to remind people that you do what you do.
Hmm.
Right? We've all gotten like postcards in the mail from real estate agents.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to a friend of mine who's a very high performing real estate agent, why do real estate agents send mailers out to neighborhoods saying, I just sold this house in your neighborhood?
Hmm.
And he goes, because when you're about to sell your house, you only do that every decade, every 7 years.
Hmm.
So even though I'm one of the best in the industry, you don't know that because you're not in the industry.
Right.
So you're going to be like, oh, who sold that house down the street last month? And call that person. That person might be the worst agent
Right.
in the whole industry, but proximity and recency bias are real.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've realized is in our industry, like I know who the top people are
Hmm.
at our firm, at other firms, but most CEOs don't. They might know who's called them for a job recently,
Right.
but that doesn't mean that person's great. I mean, every real estate agent gets the great house once in a while. They may
Right.
not get all the great houses. So you have to remind people that you are there, what you do, that you do it well. And because when they have a need, you have to remind them that you want to be in the consideration set. So that's one. Or two. So work hard, remind people that you do what you do.
Right.
And then the third thing is differentiate.
Hmm.
And not just remind them, but try and remind them in a way that is different from others.
Hmm.
So what is it that you do differently than other people in the profession? Or what does your firm do differently than other firms in the profession? And ideally both. Ideally, you can have a level of differentiation because you're at a great firm. I happen to think we're the best. And you individually, why are you differentially better for this project? And then the final thing I'll say is, if you're great at this job, you're not just selling yourself, you're selling the firm, the team, the capabilities well beyond yourself.
Right.
And that's something I learned at McKinsey. You can't go in and say, I can solve every problem you have as a CEO. If they've got a corporate finance restructuring problem, I might not have been the person to help them, but I certainly knew enough about our valuation practice
Right.
to understand who the expert was. I could ask them a few questions to probe, to understand how to define the problem, and then get them that conversation.
Hmm.
And that's true in search. I may not be the person to do every search for them, but I can make sure I can get them to the very best team.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There's this notion of being a trusted advisor. Is that real for executive search as well?
It is. I don't think it's true for everyone in executive search,
Hmm.
but I think if you're at the very best of your game in any professional service, you become a trusted advisor, not just to your clients, but to your placements.
Hmm.
And so the people you put in roles call you for advice, not just about their career, but about what they're doing. Is it successful? How do they deal with their team? How do they deal with their board of directors? So a lot of the best coaching I give, I always say, is this a Saturday, we're going to catch up and I'll give you a little
Hmm.
coaching, or is this an annual program? Right.
Right.
And I have a lot of executives who call me, once or twice a year because they have an acute thing they're working through.
Hmm.
And I'll go through and talk them through what I've seen others do. And, one of the things about executive search people don't realize is if you've been doing it for a long time and you're inquisitive and you're thoughtful, you see two things. You see what people who are great do, and you see what people who are not great do. And you see it from a powerful lens, which is dissatisfaction of senior leaders.
Hmm.
So when I'm interviewing a person who wants to be a CEO, and they're the second most impactful person in their company, one of the topics we inevitably will talk about is their CEO.
Hmm.
Not because they're trying to dish on whether somebody's good or bad, but what is it that they're loving about their job? What is it that they're not loving? What is working? What is not working?
Hmm.
And from that, you start to see patterns of when CEOs do certain things, it has this effect on their top team and on their top executives. And in many cases, what's different between how the top performers in their company are viewing those leadership actions versus the underperformers. And so it gives you a body of knowledge of not just what a good leader does, but what a good leader does badly.
Right.
And so when a CEO calls me for advice, I often have a huge repertoire of tactics, strategies, and questions that I can offer them because I've seen so many executives go through, everything from a bad quarter to a cantankerous board member to an underperformer on their team. And I can say, well, how are you thinking about it? What are the techniques you're using? Where are you on that journey of solving the problem and doing something about it? And give them some advice from countless other executives. And including, founders, startup executives, Fortune 50 executives, because sometimes you see only your peer group.
Right.
So you might see how your size of company is dealing with it, but the best tool might be something from a totally different size company.
Right.
And I've had the privilege of working with some of the most amazing leaders when everyone else knew they were amazing leaders,
Right.
and when nobody knew who they were yet.
Right.
And so some of the best lessons have come from people figuring out how to be good leaders as they went on their journey.
Right. People talk about how a certain company needs a certain type of CEO. Do you believe that that's true, or great leaders can adapt to any type of company, any scenario, any wartime, peacetime? What are your thoughts on that from a CEO perspective?
This is such a good question. So, total plug, I'm launching a podcast called Fit Happens.
Yes.
So, tune in, Fit Happens FM. But I believe, and this is something I've actually changed my mind on over the decades. I used to believe there was good leaders and bad leaders, like a lot of people. People would say, I need a good leader. And I think that's true. That there are certainly people who the totality of what they can do is worse or better than the totality of what someone else can do in leadership. And you know me well enough to know I am not a sports guy, but I'll use a sports analogy, which is if I told you that I had an amazing lineman, defensive lineman, and I'm going to have them be a figure skater, you'd start laughing at me.
Right.
But they're both world-class athletes.
Right.
So just go get me a good athlete, Fahad.
Right.
Get me a gold medalist, Fahad. Well, what kind? Well, that doesn't matter. I just need a great leader. So it almost sounds imbecilic. It sounds like you don't know what you're talking about when we just make one step removed thing. Now, talk about the same thing even in a job category, whether it's a CEO, a CMO, a head of product, a head of finance, a head of sales. Absolutely true that one leader who's very successful in one context can be deeply unsuccessful in another. The easiest way to demonstrate this is a lot of recent work that's been done on boomerang CEOs, CEOs who are super successful and they come back into their company. Well, it turns out that a lot of those CEOs are not successful in the second term. Now, there's lots of reasons why, but the biggest reason is that the context has often changed and the executive is not changed enough to keep up with them. And what they're trying to do is not a good fit for that second thing. So fit matters.
Yeah.
And when you're in this job and you're trying to counsel an executive or a leader or a board or an investor about hiring, you're really trying to get at that essence of what is critical in this job right now. And then does this person fit that? And what is the potential of that person relative to the trajectory of the job? Let me take a minute to unpack that. So if you have a very stable company and a very stable function, could be a head of manufacturing operations at a manufacturing company, and you don't see any major change in sight, and what you need is just incremental improvement.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. You need somebody who's excellent at that job right now. You may not need somebody who's got amazing potential to grow and shift and become something else because you have a very stable job.
Right.
You might have a head of marketing for that very same company where the customer dynamics have changed dramatically. And you need a CMO who's not just great where you are, but who can be high potential to change with the industry and the job. So a great executive search person can not only help you understand what you need, but help understand how that fits into the market context.
Absolutely.
How that fits into your competitiveness in the market context, what the balance of current capability versus future potential is, and then try and get the very best of the market to take on that job.
Yeah. That's so well said. Yeah. Thank you for that. Switching gears on the search process a little bit, how would you say a CEO search is different from, say, some of the other roles?
Yeah, there's a couple ways it's different. One is I think that context is of utmost importance. So, context matters in all jobs, but if you get it wrong for the CEO, the cascading effects are that much more pronounced.
Yeah.
So you have to be really, really clear about the context. I think the second thing is that you have a different dynamic in terms of the hiring dynamics, because CEOs are hired by boards, whether it's a board of investors, a board of independent directors, not a singular hiring manager. So there's a process of bringing that group together on three dimensions. The first is understanding that context, because even if you're an investor, you're not in the company day to day. You're not in the team meeting every day.
Right.
So how do you really understand what's needed is part of the journey and very important. The second thing is how do you bring the right consensus points out? I always say what most groups of people do is they agree through addition,
Right.
right? So even in your family, if you're figuring out what's for dinner, you ask everyone what they want. What do most people do? They kind of add stuff.
Right.
Oh, you want a salad and you want a steak and you want pizza and well, suddenly you have like 6 things for dinner.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to say, nope, we're just having a big salad.
Right.
So the same is true in executive search, where what a board does is unchecked, they just add to each other. And by the time you're done, they're all in agreement, but what they've done is create a 100-point list of things that they're looking for.
Right.
When you have a singular hiring manager, it's easier for them to say, I'm looking for these 4 characteristics, because they're only making it up in their own mind. They're only deciding in their own mind. So first step that's different is you actually have to ensure that they've got the right context for the job. The second is really trying to get them to prioritize what is most critical and not agreeing through addition. Then the third thing is you actually have a complex process, because you have to walk this whole group through the process of getting to know candidates and making a decision.
Right.
The final thing is flipping on the other side, you have a very scarce and ill-defined candidate pool.
Yeah.
Now, some industries, it's a little bit different. If you're in an industrial, I work, even though I love tech, I work across industries. If you're working for an industrial company with strong divisional structures, you'll find there's a lot of more ready-made CEOs because everyone's running little companies within their company.
Right.
If you're in tech, you may not have P&Ls even at the very largest of tech companies. And the first time anyone gets a P&L is when they sit in the CEO job.
Yeah.
And so you're recruiting more functional leaders. So even figuring out who can be a CEO is an art.
Right.
And a science. Figuring out what are the skill sets that are most required for that role become critical. So there's an element of scarcity of the talent pool that is much more critical. And there's this age-old question of, is that person ready to be a CEO?
Yeah.
Are they CEO caliber? I would say anyone can be a CEO. Buy a van, get a magnetic sticker, put it on the back of the van. Fahad's painting is in business, you're the CEO. So
right.
Being a CEO, we've made it into this mythical thing, but you can be CEO of anything. It becomes really important, and this goes right back to the context. What does it mean to be a CEO of that company? What is your real job? What is the thing you need to do? There's what the company needs to accomplish, but then there's what you need to do as CEO and what you need to have others do as a leader. Those are all really important to talk through.
When you're talking to boards, do you generally feel that there is consensus on what they want as the CEO, or is that part of the job as well for you?
It's definitely part of the job. I mean, the reality is even the most aligned boards are usually aligned at a level of, again, either addition or, they'll agree to something that doesn't exist in nature.
Right.
So if I'm like, anyone who's done consumer focus groups, there's always this joke, what do customers want? Better free, right? You ask them, what do you want? I'd like this to be better. How much would you like to pay for it? Less.
Right.
That's kind of how boards agree, right? I'm agreeing by saying I want more for less.
Right.
So I want, what do I want in a CEO? Well, they've been a successful CEO of a bigger company 2 times. They're going to take a step down for our company.
Right.
They've been at even more prestigious companies. They've worked for less, all these things that intuitively aren't real.
Yeah.
They're not going to come true, but it's a way to get a group to agree. So we often are I have to be the bad guy who says, okay, well, let's say that you might get that, and that might be the case. But more probably, you're going to get a first-time CO. More probably, you're going to get somebody who's got a deficit somewhere.
Hmm.
What are the trade-offs you want to make if we're not in that 1% or 2% probability of a repeat CO? And then I show them the data that says first-time COs outperform,
Right.
boomerang COs underperform,
Hmm.
and I try to help them understand that a lot of the human biases are incorrect. The other thing that's important when you've got a board of directors, and I would say this is true of anyone hiring. If I have a CO and I say, how many hires have you made? They're usually like, oh, I've made a lot. I'm like, how many CMO hires have you made? Maybe one, maybe two.
Hmm.
Same is true of a board. If I say, well, how many CO hires have you made? Even the most experienced board directors might have done this 2 times or 3 times or 4 times.
Hmm.
In fact, if you have a board director who's done it 5 times, they're probably proclaiming to the board
Right.
that they're an expert and holding court on their expertise. If you're doing what I do at the level and number of years I've done it, you've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Right.
And it doesn't mean you've made the decision, because sometimes clients make decisions I wouldn't have taken. I am not the decision maker. I'm the advisor, but I've watched what the decision was, and I've gotten to watch the outcome of that decision hundreds and hundreds of times.
Hmm.
And so the benefit that I bring is not, hey, I'm in your seat, I'm going to take the decision, but I've watched people in your seat over and over take the decision. I've advised them through it, and here are the traps and trade-offs along the way, and what I'd advise you to do as part of that process.
Yeah.
So it's part of the benefit of the pattern recognition.
Right. I want to drill on this a little bit. There's this well-known phrase, death by committee. And for the boards, their primary job is to de-risk things for their shareholders. So the easiest thing to say is no, right? For them, the obvious answer is to say no, especially for the board. So how does the committee actually arrive at a decision? Is that a painful process? And is that something that you say, I'm going to get this board to come to a decision?
It is a difficult process, and not always, but I do think it's difficult. And I think part of it, I have a lot of empathy, because no one wants to be wrong in hiring. Whether you're hiring an au pair for your kids, or you're selecting, a junior employee for the first time when you've had your first hire, all the way up to a board. So nobody wants to make a mistake. And I think that does lend people to 2 things. One is they tend to bias to things that appear to de-risk. And I go back to the data, right? What does the data say? What is what do the patterns say? 2, I try to make sure they're using good data in the process. So, it turns out 80% of your impression of a human happens before they open their mouth.
Wow.
Interviews done by a moderately skilled executive or board director typically have less than 20% validity.
Wow.
Okay. So better to flip a coin without meeting someone than interviewing. Okay.
Wow.
So you can up the odds by doing a more multimodal assessment. The more methods you use to triangulate somebody, the better. But it's very important to go back to a board and say, remember what you wanted. Remember what was that context we agreed was critical. Did you collect all of the information in a way that helped you understand what was sort of fact versus impression? And then are you using that to make a decision? What's unique about a board is they don't actually have to work with this person.
Right.
Right. What's amazing is when you are hiring someone for your team, part of the criteria is, a lot of people have called it the airplane test. Like, do I like this person?
Right.
Because if you're in the trenches with somebody and you got to work with them day in and day out, you actually do have to kind of like them.
Right.
You've got to kind of, it could be a work like, right? Not a personal like. It
Yeah.
can be, hey, they drive me nuts, but we work well together.
Right.
Co-founders often are like bitter spouses, right? They fight and argue, but they love working together.
Yeah.
But they also need, so a board doesn't need to like the person. They don't need to enjoy working with them, but they need to trust them. They need to respect them. They need to feel like they'll have a good give and take with them. And that gives them a bit of freedom to not be as beholden to kind of the airplane test. But I do think that boards being very thoughtful about that calculated choice is critical. And the hardest thing is you never get the A/B test.
Yeah.
You never get to say, well, what would that stock have done if I went the other way?
Right.
And what's ironic is some of the best performers I've ever placed were people the boards didn't even want to meet.
Wow.
They were skeptical on paper. They thought the person was sort of a weird fit.
Right.
They met them once and said, no, they're not right. And I had to talk them into going further in the process.
Yeah.
Now, I've had others where it was kind of love at first sight and they were off to the races. But it's interesting to me that there isn't as much predictability on how boards initially experience a candidate and the long-term outcomes. And, I believe the data matters. We track every single, I track every placement I've had, what the outcome was, what happened. Did I believe it was the right choice at the time? Did I have concerns? If I had concerns, did those concerns become something that plagued that executive in later roles? So we try to use that data to get better and better at the process. It's kind of like what's happened in sports. Again, disclaimer, not a sports guy, but the science that's come to sports, I think increasingly has come to executive search.
Yeah. Great. So we have to talk about AI because this is an AI podcast. What does AI literacy at the board and CDO level mean?
Fahad, I think it's a great question for right now because there's a lot of different ways you can think about literacy for AI and what it means for leaders. At one dimension, there's their personal productivity. Are they becoming a bionic executive? Are they becoming a bionic burger? Are they using AI in their own jobs to do it better? Right? So that's one level to peel the onion. That's one level is just, are they using it themselves to be better? Okay. The second is, are they understanding where it's going to go with some level of insight so that as arguably the board and CEO are the best, most comprehensive thinkers at the company about the whole system of the company, by understanding it, can they understand where to apply it internally, where to apply it externally, and where they shift the strategy and competitive positioning of the industry and the company? And we always say that the best executives, the best CEOs, don't just have changed performance in their companies, but they actually change the whole course of the industry, whether that's by doing things differently, innovating in a new way, reinventing a business model. And so when I think about AI literacy, there's like table stakes. Like I use ChatGPT to do something, or I use a large language model to do something
Right.
that I would have used a search engine to do in 4 years. Right? That's pretty good. Most people are there. They're searching on an LLM.
Right.
The question is, are you now building it into your workflow and your daily practices so that you're being able to accomplish more? That's at an individual level. But then at the systems level, at the organizational level, are you looking across your whole organization to understand where AI can be a differentiator of performance and where it needs to be a differentiator in strategic position? I get asked all the time, do I think AI is a bubble? And actually, I think it's the wrong question.
Absolutely.
I don't think it matters because the answer is there more hype than reality right now? Sure. Are there companies that will go under that we think are awesome? Absolutely. But, back in the 90s, there was a startup delivering restaurant orders in New York City that went under.
Right.
But the idea became DoorDash and Instacart.
Absolutely.
Right? If you look back on what Amazon's website looked like in 1996 or 1997, that's equivalent from a historical time perspective of what AI tools look like today.
Yeah.
Well, if you go back and look, and I encourage anyone who's listening right now, go back and Google your most favorite long-standing e-commerce websites. They've been around a while. Look at what they were like 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago, and see what they look like. And then imagine what they look like now and imagine the capabilities. And then go look at whatever AI tools you use, whether it's an image creator, a song creator, content synthesis, a whatever, and just imagine what that kind of progression looks like on steroids.
Right.
So is it a bubble? Who cares? My question. The question is, with that level of acceleration at the investment level that we're seeing, what's going to happen. And this will be the transformation of information and white collar work, the way that agriculture was to agriculture. And, in the US, for example, 76% of the population was engaged in agricultural work. With mechanization, that dropped to less than 2% today with higher production. So I look at that and I say, that's happening. How long it'll take, I don't know. What I know for a fact is anyone trying to predict a year out will be wrong, but over a 10, 20-year period, it will look more. And, that will be the transformation that the very best leaders will plan for that future state in a way that most people don't see coming.
Right. That's very well put. I like to classify AI knowledge in 3 brackets. The first one is you're AI aware. The second is you're AI literate. And the third one is you're AI native. Are CEO interviews, are boards requiring more and more of their CEOs to be AI literate and AI native? Or is it still they're pretty much okay with if you're AI aware and you've had good performance metrics, you can still be a good CEO?
So I do think there's a differentiation between sort of tech companies that are using AI in their products versus companies that are, and I shouldn't just limit that to tech actually, but companies where a part of what they're selling is a product or service that is deeply impacted by AI, not by using other tools, but the actual product and service from those that aren't. And then the second is the executives' expertise individually versus their understanding of the implications of their business. I would say that while there's certainly a level of dialogue around this for CEO hiring, we're still not seeing it impact decision-making because candidate scarcity is so real.
Right.
So if I have a high-performing executive who's a CEO or CEO in waiting, they will still more likely get the job than somebody who's sort of higher AI proficiency individually and in how they're transforming the organization, but doesn't yet have the effect. Now, if you use the internet as a proxy, since the best proxy we have, we'll look at what happened in the late 90s, you did see a higher degree of leapfrogging executives. You saw these really typically earlier in their career executives who got very rapid promotions because they were adopting the internet. And that allowed them to get bigger jobs quicker, either by switching industries or just going to earlier stage companies. So I think you'll see some disruption, but we're not seeing it yet dramatically. It's more like a nice to have. And if they showed some early AI literacy and competency, that would be good. With the exception of some technology companies. But the problem is it's so early because so few people, as you know, have really figured out how to make a lot of money in AI. And we're still at this, sort of somewhat skeptical stage of, just because you know about AI, it's a business. Yeah, absolutely.
So talk to me about AI in executive search today from your point of view, from your opinion. So what do you think absolutely needs to be embedded in the executive search process where AI should be used?
So we started talking about, sending bond paper by courier or FedEx around the country.
Right.
And I look at that kind of like looking at Amazon in the late 90s. It's where's it going to go? And so there's no doubt in my mind that AI technology will evolve there. By the way, I don't think it's just AI. I think AI gives people a permission to do things with technology. Well, the technology has nothing to do with AI, but it's just using technology. And it's an accelerant to using technology. I think that there's no doubt it will have a tremendous impact in my mind. It will take some time, and individuals have to be ready. The same way that if I said, will you ever buy a house by looking at videos online? Will you ever get in a car because it showed up and had a license plate? Would you ever trust somebody to pick the fruit out at the grocery store for you? All these scenarios, you're like, Jason, you're crazy. I'm never going to do that until you did, right? Human behavior has to change. I remember the number of debates in sort of the early 2001 timeframe of whether executives would ever sign up for online services. And the notion was senior people would never communicate over email, do things by video conference, sign up for online services, do things like LinkedIn. There was this perception that, well, the CEOs are never going to sign up for LinkedIn. Right. Now CEOs are like, let me brag post about my company every day on LinkedIn. Right. And good for them. Right. They want it. It's part of the operate much. It's like going on Squawk Box. Right. So I think that there's two dimensions. There's how quickly will the industry shift, and then how quickly will humans. I have no doubt the humans will be the lagger, not what could happen for the industry or before executive search. And there's a whole lot of things that you can do in executive search to apply AI, whether that's in uh, understanding the job better, in understanding the company better, in understanding who could do the job, in actually recruiting them, the mechanics of recruiting, in just staying in touch better. I mean, I use a simple example just because it's such a basic one that anyone who uses AI in a native sense would go like, duh.
Yeah.
If you get a call from a client, if you're in the executive search business, you get a lot of emails, like everyone gets like this. You probably get hundreds of emails a day. We all miss emails.
Right.
Well, even something so simple as, hey, this email is important,
Right.
is a great use case for AI.
Yeah.
Now, that's not an executive search specifically, every executive. But what if AI could say the candidate, not just one of your candidates wrote to you, but the candidate for the job for whom there's a scarcity of candidates and whom you're most worried about wrote you a note saying they want to talk. Well, that email might get flagged as pull me out of the meeting to go call them versus put it on my calendar for 2 days from now to checking. That's a perfect example of AI in terms of using time and scheduling and communications, which is part of the art of running a lot of, doing a lot of search projects. A lot of that comes down to how am I using my time and attention? Who am I communicating with when? And what's the criticality? And that's true of business development. It's true of candidate management. It's true of stakeholder management along the process. Board member who's kind of easygoing. It just has a quick practical question. I might say, oh, Jason's in a meeting, call Fahad.
Yeah.
Not a super specialized AI for search,
Yeah.
but these are all things I imagine will be just obvious. Much like you wouldn't think twice emailing me instead of sending me a courier package by carrier pigeon.
Absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about your predictions and any contrarian views on how you think executive search is going to change and how the role of the CEO is going to change, maybe even how the liquidity on this market is going to change with AI.
It's good that you didn't bundle like two difficult or critical questions. So let's start with just predictions about the industry, and these are just mine. Again, reminder, not the firm. I think it's going to take longer than people think, but I believe there will be a profound shift in almost all white collar work, but especially jobs like recruiting, where there's a combination of content knowledge and process, where a lot of the inefficiencies in the job can be done in a much better way, not just faster. Faster is not always the right metric because humans have to make decisions about their careers.
Right.
I can know it's a perfect job for you, but I gotta let you come to that conclusion. I can't, I can't badger you into it. But there's a lot of things that I think will be transformative. I think AI will get much better at helping people predict where is their phenomenal talent versus not phenomenal talent or sources of talent. I think AI will get much better at helping people on both sides predict where they should spend their time to engage in those career conversations. And this isn't just the firms, it's also the candidates, right? Imagine I've heard from a lot of executives. And I remember when I was in McKinsey, I used to get a bunch of recruiting emails, and half of them because I'd been in the business. I was like, you don't even understand what I do. Why are you sending me this email? Why are you leaving me voicemails? You're like, pray and pray. Yes, pray and pray. It's so even as a candidate, imagine if you had an AI career counselor that said, Bod, make sure you respond to this email because Jason's not only a great guy from a great firm, but he's got a really cool job, or it sounds like, or every time he reaches out, or I've examined his network online and he seems like somebody you ought to get to know. Even on the receiving end, I think AI can be incredibly. It's sure, absolutely. On the supply side, on the job side, everything from what is the predictability of this being a search that will close quickly versus take a lot of time? Will the hard thing about this project be the client or the job, right? Will the hard thing about this client be the industry or the company or the job, right? Even those things can make huge transformations in how you staff a project, how you think about attacking it, where you put the resources. And then I have no doubt that we will see a transformation of human and agent workforce in every white collar. I know my friends at McKinsey recently announced that they had 60,000 employees, 25,000 of those being boss. Well, we're on that same turn.
Yeah.
And I actually think it'll be inverse. My only surprise at that comment was that it wasn't, we have 100,000 employees and 80,000 bots, because you should have an infinite number of, closed-ended double AI agents. I think the other thing you'll see in search is a disproportionate focus on the core, on executive search, where I actually think some of the biggest opportunity is in all the other things about running a business and expanding a business that are not just tied to the search process. And so whether it's what market to enter or how to move people around, how to performance manage your people, how to do better marketing, how to decide on where do you need an office versus not, how do you do contracting, right? These are very traditional, conservative professional services businesses, which is what you want, right? If you're on the other side, you don't want the lawyer who's like, you know, edgy and fast. You don't want the search professional who's edgy and fast, right? You don't want the firm who's like trying new things to the point of risk, right? But I do think that means that all of these firms, all of this industry will have to be that much, the best leaders will embrace AI, not just in the core, right? But actually to do all the things that is not, or all the areas where the critical capability of the firm is not, right, the best, right? And, there's this notion of do what you're great at, not what you're not great at, get other people to do, right? And like I was laughing, a lot of clients always have these big recruiting teams. And I'm like, are you trying to be a great recruiter? Or do you just want to pretend you're good at it? Because that's all we do. That's all we're, yeah. And so I actually think you'll find this specialization becomes more important because the cost of doing business between firms would go down because it'll be easier to do business with the collection of entities, as opposed to the old Coase theory at a firm for, 1930s. It's kind of like Dale Carnegie. How to Win Friends and Influence People was published in the 30s.
Right.
You don't think human science, the behavioral sciences have improved in 90 years? So, there's a lot we can improve upon understanding that your impression, the first nonverbal moments of meeting that form most of your opinion probably isn't how you should do selection of executives, right? As an exec.
Yeah.
So what do I think AI will do? A lot.
Yeah.
How fast? Slower than we think and faster.
Yeah.
Right? In 10 years' time, we'll look back and go, oh yeah, you were the dude sending bond paper on carrier pigeons. Like, isn't that a ridiculous thing? But we won't see it coming because it'll happen so consistently over those 10 years or over those 7 years or over those 15 years.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of leaders in all services will underestimate the amount of change about to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of anxiety amongst executive search folks right now with AI because they see what's possible and they almost always equate it to, oh, this means less work for me. What's your advice to those people that are thinking about the act?
Are you a broker or an expert? So I think in all of these markets, it's the same thing that happened with, real estate agents when platforms came on to be, or stockbrokers when investment management had a lot better tools, robo advisors, every wealth manager with the robo advisors, you remember they're like, oh, we're going to get put out of this at night. No, there's a role for you. The question is, what is your expertise?
Right.
And a great search professional has expertise in stress management, group dynamics, project management, helping understand how to get somebody or a group of people through a very complex, infrequent purchase. Right. If you're running a call center, you know how to hire call center agents because you do it hundreds of times a year.
Right.
If you're a very senior executive, a CEO hiring a chief marketing officer, you might do that twice in firm. So do you still want to rely on an expert? Absolutely. question for the industry, are most search people experts or are they brokers? And so if all your job is moving people and paper around, I'd go back to school. And I'd actually go back and study something. I don't mean literally, but go back and educate yourself so you become an expert. Yeah. And if you're an expert, there will always be a role for you if you're an expert and you're one of the best experts in your field. So if you're out there doing engineering recruitment, but you have no real idea what a great engineer does, okay, you ought to figure that out. Yeah. Because right now what you're selling is hustle. And guess what does hustle a lot better than the human? Yeah. It can send a lot more emails out than I should. It can pump out a lot more phone calls. It can even use my voice and my tone to do those things. Yeah. So if you're a junior recruiter at a tech firm recruiting engineers and you think you're awesome because you send out more emails and you're more on top of it, I'd be like,
Yep.
Keep learning. Yep. Figuring out what your expertise is.
Yep. I use 3 metrics to get a little techie on this. There's 3 metrics that will determine if your task can be done by AI or those 3 metrics are: one is of perception. How do you perceive that information? What do you know? Is it cross people? Is it across multiple organizations? Or is it something you can perceive just by reading something? How difficult is it to perceive that information? The second is, how difficult is it to piece it? Being able to understand all the metrics when you're making a decision. AI is very singular still, even though they're performing at the 99% out of a chemist or of a doctor or of a search or of a biologist. It's still very single subject matter. If you need to reason across multiple metrics, then you have a complex reasoning goal or you have complex reasoning tasks. And the third is of autonomy. Does this decision require you to get multiple people involved? And if the answer is yes, then it's a low autonomy task. If your task is low perception, it's low reasoning, and you can do it pretty autonomously, it doesn't require a lot of people, then that task will likely get automated by AI. And all you do is you look at a conglomerate of all the tasks that we do. And if all of those are low, then your role is going to get out. It's able to your role better. So thank you for that. I want to do a quick lightning round with you if you're game for that. How does that sound? So it's good. So I'm going to ask you a question. You're going to respond in a sentence, few words. Most overrated leadership trait. Curse. One skill every CEO must master in the AI era.
Self-reflection.
That's a good one. I agree with that. One mistake boards keep repeating.
Not spending enough time defining column the track solve.
Very true. One book every board member should read.
This is totally unfair because I have not. Immediately 100 spring to mind.
By the way, folks, if you don't know this, Jason is one of the most avid readers I have ever met in my life. He probably does a book a week. Yeah, that's crazy. And if you ever see him in an airport, even when he came to meet with me today, he had a book in his hand. There is no spare time where Jason is not reading. It's crazy. Like the most insane reader I've ever met in my life.
I'll give you So I'll tell you the book I'd say, because I think it's a good one right now in an AI first world, is Simpler Strategy. And the reason I like it is it really makes you think about what is your strategic advantage as a company. And I think more than any practical, I could say a bunch of technical books or, geopolitical, but I think the fundamental thing for a board member is to understand, is your company better positioned this board meeting than it was the last board? And to do that, fundamentally, you have to understand the basics of strategy. And maybe because I was at McKinsey for years, I love strategy. But what I realized about strategy is it really comes down, for those who don't read the book, I'll do a bad synthesis. It really comes down to, on your supply side and on your demand side, do you have competitive advantage? So I'll talk about talent because that's what we're talking about largely today. When CEOs come to me and say, we have the best culture, we have the most engaged workforce, I hire the very best people, we're amazing. I usually ask one simple question, which is, do you pay more or less than your biggest competitor for talent?
Right.
And if the answer is, oh no, I pay the best in the industry.
Right.
I'm like, is that because you're extra benevolent or because you actually have competitive advantage? You don't have competitive advantage.
Right.
Because the reality is if you have to if you and I are in the same business
Yeah.
and you have to pay more than I do for talent and we have the same retention and quality, I actually have the advantage, not you.
Right.
And so you reframe competitive strategy on that dimension.
Wow.
A lot of noise that comes at a board can very simply be analyzed around this concept of competitive advantage in a way that I think is much, much simpler, which for a board member, you get so much information to digest that it's helpful to have it's often helpful to have one or two principles or foundations around how you're going to analyze these. Yeah. So anyhow, short answer is simpler strategy.
I think we should do a podcast just on top athlete pace. I think there's a lot of science behind that. And you're right. Some of the best performing teams don't have the highest paid people, right? And it's like, why? That the team inherently has a competitive advantage. It's not because I've just paid my way to victory. I've actually figured out how to create a competitive advantage on that. Last, best advice you've ever received in your career.
So the best advice, I'll pair it two different things. One was a book I read a long time ago called How to Become a CEO. And there's a line I'll never forget, which would make your boss look good and make your boss's boss look even better. And I think that particularly in a lot of fast-moving industries, people can become very self-oriented and they forget that your job is actually to help the people around you and help the people above you be more successful. Not at this individual competitive level, but like the sort of concept of the job. So like make your boss more successful makes you more successful. I'll combine that with something I got more recently, which really made an impact on me. I'm a critical guy, right? I grew up in the business of consulting where you go in and you rip apart problems, try and figure out how to make businesses operate better. And somebody said to me, have more empathy for the person in the job. Now, as a recruiter, I always have empathy. I always have curiosity. It's something that I think makes me pretty good at what I do. But as an employee, as a leader, I don't always have as much sympathy and empathy for the people I work for because not because I don't like them, but because I'm always trying to make things better.
Right.
And this comment of put yourself in their shoes and have a little empathy for them really made me think about some of the best people I've ever had working for me were also some of the biggest pains because they were always difficult. And they weren't difficult because they had bad intentions. They were difficult because they had such good intentions.
Right.
But if I pass that advice on and said, just take a beat to think about what I was thinking about before you unloaded on everything I was doing wrong.
Yeah.
And reframe things in a more helpful way.
Yeah.
It would make it was advice I wish I got earlier in my career. And it's super, super powerful.
Yeah.
Especially when combined, because I've always had the former. I've always been like, my job is to make the company. I've always had an owner mindset. I've always had the mindset of like, I want the company to perform well, therefore I need my boss to perform well. But on the flip side, I have always done it with as gentle a touch in a nice way. Like I care about this person. I have empathy that they've got a lot on their plate, and I'm going to figure out how to make my advice more easily digestible and actionable because I recognize that they're dealing with a lot more than just me.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the two best.
That's really cool because I think as leaders, as CEOs, my coaches always tell me to have a lot of empathy for the people who work for you. But also, it almost feels like it's a one-way street. Like, I also have a lot of pressures. Who is empathizing for me?
Doesn't your team come in every day and say, Fahad, how are you? What can I do to make your day better? So, even this idea of like your CEOs, the best CEOs are solving for the global max, right? They're, and I always laugh, my kids always ask, do you have to use calculus every day? And thank God, no, because I don't remember it. But I always remember the concept of a global and local maximum because it's such a powerful concept.
Yeah.
Most of us in our career are always solving for what we view as the global maximum, but really we don't have enough visibility, right? We're solving for our local maximum. And a great CEO is doing a job to look across all of those curves, right, to try and figure out what is the thing they need to have the organization solve for. And if you can bring that empathy and that perspective and the curiosity to engage with the CEO to try and or whoever your manager is, to try and understand what is that global maximum, right? Or if they don't know what it is, how to find it, it'll make you a better employee at every single step of your career.
Right. Yeah. I'm thinking of, when I was growing up, I always saw my dad as this really strong figure who just was like Superman. He could go through anything, and he never showed vulnerability because he didn't want to maybe in his mind show weakness. And then as I grew older, he started becoming more and more vulnerable with me, and that also automatically improved the level of empathy I had with him. Maybe CDOs need to do more of that too.
Yeah. I mean, it's like parenting. I mean, we're both parents, we both have kids. You know, you can do no harm and you're perfect and brilliant, or tell you're an idiot. And then at some point when your kids get older, you become brilliant. And employees probably have the same, when you're a junior employee, you look up to these senior people and you're like, oh my God, that's so impressive. Then when you're in the middle of your career, like they're all idiots. And then you get to the senior end of your career, you have a lot more empathy again for your board members and your CEO and people top. So I do think that's a good analogy, but it is recognizing that CEOs are just humans. They're trying to do a great job, and your job is to help them do a great job. Yeah. And to have the understanding of where you fit in that is really,
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, always a pleasure. I'm excited for your podcast. Can't wait to watch it. And I think we should do this more often.
well, I'm delighted to come back. And hopefully if you listened, you got a little gem or two.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure.